Hey everybody, some light news here. All right, let me see what I can do. All right, let's see. This is better. It's not better. Well, it's gonna have to be good enough for today. All right, so I hope everybody's doing well. As you can see, I am not in the usual spot. For those who have followed me for a while, I'm actually at my parents' house. Give you some little bit of flood news before I start. I hope you understand why I'm here. We had to move from the place where we were staying temporarily. My family and we found out about a month ago that we had to move because the house where we were staying was for sale and it was sold. So we had to go, and we had kind of a short time to get set up, and we took a while to find a place where we could go. So we moved, and because everything was done last minute, I couldn't get the internet connected at my house. We moved on Saturday, so today is Monday. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So we moved 2 days ago, and everything is a little insane right now. So trying to settle into this house, trying to get everything settled. One of my daughters, we were homeschooling until now, and one of my daughters, my 12-year-old daughter, has decided that she is going to school. So that's what we were also doing this week, trying to get her set up for school, all that crazy stuff while we were moving. And on Friday, I am leaving for South Carolina to give an icon carving workshop. So I'm going to be leaving for almost a month. Usually I leave for 3 weeks plus travel. I go to Charleston to work with my friend and partner, Andrew Gould, who's an architect and a liturgical designer. So all that is happening at the same time. It's a little bit mad. So that's why I'm here at my parents doing the Q&A with you guys from here. So first off, as some of you know, the channel has reached 50,000 subscribers on, I think it was on Sunday, while I was setting things up in my house. I saw on my phone that we reached 50,000 subscribers. The video Symbolism and Propaganda in the last month or so, for some reason, has started to garner attention again, and was covered by different YouTube channels like Computing Forever. Also, some of the Gamergate people, Geeks and Gamers, featured it on his channel through a Bounding into Comics article. Anyway, so there's been some interest around that video, and I think that's probably why the subscribers just shot up. So for all you new subscribers, welcome to our channel, and we do this every month. Recently, we started doing it live again. We started doing it live. And I've got two moderators in the chat. I've got my buddy Kristen Chad, who has the best name in the world, and I also have Jacob Russell, who he is becoming a good friend of mine, and he's also running the Facebook group where people talk about symbolism and about the videos that I'm doing. So here we go, guys. As you know, all the $10 patrons ask questions in advance, so I'll go through those first, and then we'll get to whatever super chat type things happen to come about in the chat. Thanks to all the new people that have been supporting me through Patreon as well, because as you know, as those who follow me on Facebook or Twitter, on social media, you've seen that I'm not posting a lot of carving pictures these days, just because things have been so mad that it's been really difficult to keep that up. And so the videos and the patrons and all this stuff has become my main source of revenue for now. It's going to change, but it's going to take a few months. So, all right, hey guys, here we go. So I'm going to start with the questions on my website through the symbolicworld.com. So Pat Shire asks, "Good evening, Jonathan," and he apologizes right away. Sorry for the lengthy submission last time. I'll try to get to the point better this time. So he says that he's been listening to the Harry Potter audiobooks and have been wrestling with the symbolism of Lord Voldemort, his Death Eaters, and how Harry relates. And so then he kind of tells the story of Voldemort, and is asking me to help him understand how Voldemort relates to Harry Potter. So I have to be honest, with you guys. I'm not a big fan of Harry Potter. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm not that impressed with the story. I know Jordan Peterson's really impressed with that story. I'm not particularly impressed with it. I feel like Harry, at least in the movies, I saw the movies, I haven't read the books. In the movies, Harry has a weird Mary Sue element to him. Like he's everybody loves him and everybody wants to be him, and everybody he's kind of like this kind of young superstar all the time. But anyways, the idea that there's a relationship between death and power, and there's a strangeness in that relationship, is something that I've talked about, and you can kind of understand it, that there's this link between death and power. So Harry, you could say something like that Voldemort and Harry, like Voldemort is this, Voldemort just means, what does it mean? Like flight of death. I mean, that's what it means. So Voldemort has to do with the symbolism of death. But although Harry Potter is related to the problem of power in a magical scientific sense. We often oppose magic and science, but it's not, at least in terms of symbolism, it's not the right way to see it. The idea of power in the sense of the capacity to act on the world. In that sense, both magic and technology are related. And so there's a relationship between death. I talked about this idea of the garments of skin, the problem of the garments of skin and power. And so I think that's the relationship that is trying to be played out in the Harry Potter books. So Harry has a scar. So a scar is death. It's like it's a residue of death, right? It's a residue of healing that is not completely healed and that has left a mark, and that mark is kind of like the source of his pain, but at the same time maybe secretly the source of his power. So this relationship, that this confrontation that Harry had with death as a baby, has left him in pain, alone, an orphan, all these negative things, but is also seems to be the source of his power. And so that's what Harry kind of has to deal with. That's what he has to kind of figure out how to deal with that. And so, ultimately it leads to the death of Voldemort, I guess. And so this idea that he vanquished death with death, that he used the power that death gave him, the power that Voldemort gave him, to finally defeat Voldemort himself. And so you can get the idea that maybe also Voldemort is linked to Harry, in the sense that in that moment when Harry and him had an exchange, Voldemort left something of himself in Harry. You could say something like that. And so he kind of gave something to Harry, and Harry received this power that is related to death. And so now, how do you deal with that? How do you use the exterior powers you have, your power to act in the world? How do you make sure that you use that for positive things? Technology is an ambivalent thing. I've talked about this many times. It's not neither good nor bad, but it can go both ways. And so the more power you have, the more good you can do. Medicine, all the things we get in technology, but also the worse, the more bad you can do. You can have nuclear weapons, and you can have systematic murder of large populations. You can control your people. All of that is related to the power to act on the world. So I hope that answers that question. So David Flores asks, what is the significance of Adam being put to sleep during Eve's creation? So this is an interesting thing. If you read some of the church fathers, you'll see several church fathers will say something like, God foreknew the fall, and it's because God foreknew the fall that he separated male and female. The idea that the original Adam, or the original man, would have been an androgynous being that was fully had the masculine and feminine elements fully united within him. He had heaven and earth. You see, I've told you that story before about this ocean of God breathes his breath into this gathered dust. So Adam is an image of the union of heaven and earth. But then in the creation of Eve, it's like you have a separation of heaven and earth once again. And that separation is remedied through marriage, through family, through the unity of the sexes in a sexual union or in a marriage. But there's also is that reality of the separation. And so a lot of the church fathers talk about this moment of the separation of Adam into male and female as like I said, something which is preparing Adam for the fall, this falling into opposites. And so you can see it in that very imagery. The idea that Adam falls asleep is an image, a kind of foretelling of death. Sleep and death in symbolism is always extremely linked together. So you can see that in that image. So Adam sleeps, and in his sleep, that's when Eve is created, in this little death. But it's not death, really. I mean, we have to be careful. It's not death, but it's something akin to death. It's something which kind of points towards the future and the fall. And that's why, for example, we have these images of Christ at the crucifixion. There are these beautiful hymns in the church on Holy Thursday, Holy Friday, where it talks about how Christ on the tree, as he's being crucified, the soldier pierces his side, and out of his side the church is born. And so there's this relationship between the creation of Eve in Genesis and the church coming out of the death of Christ, where Christ kind of flips it all back and replays that moment in Genesis, but it's like a new beginning. All right, so David Flores says, could you tell us about the fish painting behind you? Well, there's no fish painting behind me anymore because you'll never see me in that house again. But that fish painting it's just when we moved into the house where we were before, in the other videos that you saw for the last few months, the person who was selling the house had left a lot of her stuff in there, and that fish painting was a part of it. And so it was not chosen, but as you know, symbolism happens, and as we're swimming out of a flood, the image of the fish is always a positive image in death. That is this idea of these nuggets, this shiny living thing which is hiding in death. So that's pretty much always the symbolism of fish in terms of, especially in terms of Christianity. So David Flores also asked me to do a symbolic interpretation of Gawain and the Green Knight. I could do a video on that, but I'm definitely not going to do that right now. And he said it would be interesting if I did a series on Gilgamesh. I would really be interested in doing that. I will probably be doing that. Like I told you guys, what I'm going to be doing from now on is every month I'm going to put out a video for patrons only, and it's mostly going to be interpretation of ancient stories. And so if I do go into, let's say, Gilgamesh or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it'll probably be in those patron-only videos. So look out for that. So Eddie T asks, is it significant that Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss? The answer is, it is extremely significant. But my goodness, that story, that moment is really difficult to understand. I will have to be honest with you. I've been thinking about Judas's kiss for years, and I honestly do not think that I fully grasp that moment. The best thing I can say for that is it is a supreme inversion, right? It's the supreme inversion where you are betraying to the outsiders, because it's the Romans, that are coming to get him. You're betraying to the outsider through a gesture of communion. So you could see it as the ultimate betrayal. But I honestly, I think that there's something far deeper in that moment, something that is really, really critical. And maybe because it's so critical, that's the reason why I don't fully see through that moment. But I'll keep thinking about it, keep praying about it, keep meditating on it. Hopefully one day I will have a proper intuition on that on that moment in the Bible story. So Eddie T asked, why does the worship of the soil often involve self-mutilation and human sacrifice? See, for example, Sibylline's castration of Attis, the wicker man described by Caesar in Gaul, the child sacrifice performed by Israel's wicked kings in the Bible. Even Demeter is said to have eaten part of Penelope's shoulder. Am I discerning a theme? For sure there's a theme. For sure there's a theme in the, I'm not sure the things that you're mentioning are related to each other. For sure there's the castration of Attis. I mean, there's so many things in what you said, but let's just, one of the things you could understand in terms of the earth, let's say, the problem of, if you look at Demeter and the notion of the shoulder that was eaten, you can have this sense of that there's a relationship between the flip of in that happens in the earth, that it's related. I'm afraid to say this, but that it's related to certain images of self-turning. You know, that there's a relationship between, let's say, the flip that happens in the earth and something like cannibalism or something like, you know, when I talk about this weird double inversion that happens, you know, there's something about that in the symbolism of how the edge turns, you know, and that's why the imagery has to do with self-contradictory things like the carnival, like the clowns, all of that we're talking about. There's something in that, but it's hard to fully pinpoint. It's hard to fully pinpoint, and also something really subversive about that, you know, and so it's dangerous to talk about it too much. You know, that's why you have things like Saturnalia at the end of cycles. You have these weird moments, that weird kind of inversion moments at the end of cycles. But for sure, Christianity kind of solves that problem. You know, we've talked about this several times. Christianity solves the problem of the end with something like communion, which is both the let's say the right hand and the left hand, which both has the bread and wine, but also this weird symbolism of the scandal of cannibalism kind of joined together, where it's not fully one or fully the other, that they're kind of joined together. That it kind of solves that problem. But yeah, so I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to totally pierce that mystery for you there, Eddie. This is tough stuff to think about, especially all this imagery that has to do with human sacrifice and cannibalism. You know, I've made a few videos about that talk about cannibalism that kind of look into that a little bit, but it's stuff that's really difficult to understand and to talk about. All right, so Jacob says, I've been devouring articles at Orthodox Art Journal and have found Father Silouan Justiniano's articles, as well as your Recover of the Art series, very helpful in reintegrating visual art back into my life, especially icons. The notion of a hierarchy in iconography is especially intriguing. My problem is seeing good iconography versus whatever else there is. I have found myself not minding a Western touch like Archimandrite, Xenon, or Vladimir Grigorenko, but I'm also very drawn to the style of Lyuba Yatskiv. I don't even know who that is, which is strangely troubling because she seems to make, oh yeah, I think I have seen her icons, to make a giant leap into modern styles. A part of me is saying it's not right, but I can't explain why, which leads me to wonder what is right, or maybe a focus on what is not right should come first. Iconography is very difficult to talk about because I think that you said it properly. There's a hierarchy which sets itself up. I think that's how we have to see it. There are no canons about style. There's nothing in the Church Fathers would talk about style except for talking about the need for icons to not, let's say not awaken the passions in a person. So so icons do have to have a certain sobriety, a certain aesthetic appearance, because you don't want them to kind of bubble up your emotions in an extreme way. So that can account for a lot of the stylistic choices that icons came to make. Now, like I said, now there's a hierarchy, and so the way that it should be is that you should have a basic desire to integrate your icons into a community, right? That's one of the things that people often forget, is that, you know, if I'm trying to communicate something to you, I need to take into account who I'm communicating to. I have to ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? I want to integrate it into a community. And so if you push the edge too far, then at some point you run the risk of distracting the viewer from what it is you should be trying to do, which is bringing someone into communion with the saints. And so you have to be careful. Now, I can't tell you what the strict law is as to where this goes awry, but there's an organic process in the church where, you know, there has to be a kind of proportion. If the proportion isn't right, then at some point things start to break apart. And we saw that in the destruction of iconography, in the history of the icons. We saw that as the proportions started to fall apart, and as the Western style, like you said, it's like I don't mind a hint of Western art. Now that you could say something like a spice of Western art, but there's a difference between that and, let's say, full-on Baroque Rubens, you know, art, where it's all flesh, it's all moving, and it has, it is exactly that thing that the fathers warned us about, the problem of eliciting the passions in people. So I'm afraid that I can't give you a strict answer, and I would be very wary of people who think that they're able to give you a strict answer. You have certain icon groups right now that that say things like, if it doesn't have this style or this style or this style, then it's not an icon. And that's just the wrong way to address it. We have to see it, like you said, and like I've always said, in a hierarchy, which is we have to say that it can be an icon, but it can be an icon which is leading us into something which is a little bit on the edge. And we just have to be aware of that and be careful for the whole of iconography not to slip and kind of move into that direction. But there's nothing wrong per se with innovation, but there's nothing right with innovation either. There's nothing desirable about innovation. Innovation tends to happen in moments, of transition, or just this organic change that happens. But I would say that most iconographers should have a desire to be traditional. Even though some of their art might not look totally traditional, I think most iconographers should express that desire, which is the desire to be traditional, is the desire to engage and participate in the community. And if you don't have that, then you're just trying to titillate people and to create innovation for innovation, jazz style or kind of rock and roll types. All right. And so Jesse Blaney asks, hi, Jonathan. So here goes. I have 3 big interrelated questions on nostalgia. So I might not answer all of these, but let's just see what we got. Question number 1, memory and its connection to nostalgia. I know that in one sense, nostalgia acts as a refusal to let go of a memory or an event in the past, and that nostalgia also acts as a reminder to return home. Has the term wanderlust become a glorified pursuit of escapism, living in a dream world? Does homesickness, the opposite of wanderlust, help us do better understand what heaven really is? My intuition is that this is what the story of the prodigal son symbolically trying to communicate. So I think here it really does depend on words. I do think that there is a sense of nostalgia in the highest sense of that word, which could be like you said, a desire to return home. So we could say that we all have in us a nostalgia for our paradise. that all of us have a nostalgia for Eden, that is something that is built into the human person in the fall. Now, the difficulty that I have is that a lot of nostalgia today is trite. It is a sentimentalism, and so it's this. It is this kind of weird sentimentalism, this attachment to the superficial forms of the past, and I think that's the dangerous. I think that's a dangerous thing. Actually, I always kind of joke and say that what I do, let's say my icon carving, is tradition without nostalgia. That is, that I'm not making the icons that I make in a kind of sentimental desire to preserve the past, to preserve some forms that were there before. I want to take what has been handed to me and make it alive. Like I want it to be alive and participative and part of the world. Whereas there's something about nostalgia, especially kind of a kind of modern nostalgia that we find, in people, in grown-ups who, I mean, I have it too. Like I was gonna say, grown-ups who still like the things they liked as kids, like grown-ups who still collect toys or whatever, all that stuff. There's a. I think that's an empty, shallow thing. So, question 2: does Western society glorify nostalgia? If this is true, is it an undoing larger frameworks of the meta narrative? I totally understand what you mean. I've also been thinking of nostalgia in big terms and how it relates to the biblical story of Lot's wife. Yeah, that's a really really good image, actually. The idea that Lot's wife experienced a moment of nostalgia for something that she shouldn't be experiencing nostalgia for. And so as she had to leave, as she had to move away from that burning place, she looked back and remembered the wrong thing, you could say. So my symbolic intuition is that when she turns around and looks back at the city, the past that's being destroyed, she takes on that destructive form or image. Well, it's not just that. Is that she is frozen, right? In that sense, in that image, the fact that she looks back at the past with this nostalgic eye, it means that she becomes a pillar. She becomes a pillar of salt. She becomes frozen and she can't move forward. Like, I mean, it's like someone who breaks up with his girlfriend and then he just keeps living in that weird nostalgia, and then he can't move forward. He can't get into another relationship. You can't move on with your life. The same thing would be with someone who let's say someone dies and then they don't mourn, but rather they just kind of hold on, and they don't want to go through the process of mourning, and then they're stuck. They can't move forward. And so I think like you said, that I think there are some aspects of nostalgia which are, maybe the right way to say it would be that you should be nostalgic for paradise. You should be nostalgic to return home, the real home, let's say the true home, but that desiring capacity that we have is the same desiring capacity that can also make us nostalgic for all these trite things that we had in our past, all these things that just give us a good feeling, when we engage with them, or give us this kind of sadness, this melancholy sadness. All right, so question 3 for Jesse Blaney. He says the third question is about storytelling and its strange connection to nostalgia. And so he talks about this idea of remaking films, covering songs. And so I acknowledge all storytelling is a retelling, a passing on of meaning, a connection to a memory or idea. If storytelling is done clumsily, is that with the effect of what nostalgia is? So nostalgia in this way becomes a cheap ploy, a magic trick, akin to the game of Chinese whispers. I think that you have a point. One of the ways to maybe understand that is to understand that, because in his comments he talks about the fact that now people are just remaking movies, like just remaking all the stuff that we like, and say as an adult, when I was a child, Star Wars and Marvel Comics and all this stuff. Now all they're doing is kind of rehashing these same things over and over. It's like, is it Fuller House? My daughter watches that show. My goodness. Whew, like when I was a kid, I remember that. Like, how is it that this possible that this is going on? And I think a good way to understand it is to see it as, because like you said, the true stories, the real stories, they can be retold over and over because they're identity forming. You know, the fact of retelling the story of Christ every year and going through the liturgical cycle, the fact of telling the fairy tales, of all these stories that we tell over and over, it's an identity forming act, and it's liturgical in the sense that it's something that we kind of go back over and over, and it creates a pattern for our existence. And so I think what we're seeing, and I mentioned this in some videos before, so I think that what we're seeing is a desire for liturgy, a desire for a permanent or a stable pattern, and it's being done in a very superficial way, which is Star Wars. Like people who live in Star Wars, or people who, you know, who are totally obsessed with mangas or you know, Marvel comics, or you know, who talk about old video games and have this nostalgic feeling about old video games and all that stuff. Like I think that it's a superficial version. It's a superficial filling of the deep desire we have for a permanent or let's say a very deep pattern in which we can be embedded and participate in. All right, so I'm going to keep going here, Jesse. So Masasar asks, hello, is there a distinction between distraction and avoidance? Is the sin of despondency related to these? The parable of the talents come to mind, desiring to be profitable servant with what has been given, but bearing it more often than not. I think there is a distinction between distraction and avoidance. I mean, there's probably a relationship between the two. You know, avoidance is when you know what you have to do and you don't do it. Distraction is when you let yourself be taken away from the things you need to do. And distraction is almost like a form of forgetting. Avoidance is different, because usually when you avoid something, it burns you. You know, it's like procrastinating. You know, you have this burning thing you need to do, and then you feel it, and so you avoid doing it. You kind of skirt around it, but then it's like this coal on your head where it's constantly digging into you. Whereas distraction, or this kind of letting go, or you know, drinking or watching a lot of movies or whatever you want to do to kind of not have to think about the thing you should be doing, or the direction you should be going, could be a way to maybe distraction is a way to deal with avoidance, a way to kind of ease the suffering of avoidance for a little while. All right, so Keenan Cronin asks, oh my word, Jonathan, I feel so bad about you having to answer these long questions. There should definitely be a word limit. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. I'm not going to lose and he says, before you lose your temper at us. No, I do think, though, that, guys, if you're going to write a question, you try to have to condense it, because I think people will get tired of reading the long things. Like try to condense your questions a little bit, just so that we can kind of move through the questions, and it doesn't feel like I'm reading your statements on the Q&A, and that becomes what the Q&A is about. All right. So Keenan asked, what do you think is the right way for Christians to evangelize in the modern world? I personally have an instinct to try and explain the difficult parts of the Bible to friends and family in an attempt to help them see what I see in the stories, similar to what JBP seems to do, but something tells me that this is the wrong approach. Seeing as Jesus commands us to Any thoughts on how we might approach evangelization effectively? I think that the best way to evangelize is to become a saint. That's for sure. The best way to evangelize is for people to see joy and love and meaning in your own life. That's the thing that attracts people the most, even more than any argument you could do. People are attracted to those who have purpose and meaning and who have a stable foundation. Those who love their neighbors, all of that, I think, is the best way to evangelize. But I also do think that there is room for a more, let's say, engaged approach. One of the things that has happened in the past 100 years or whatever is that Christians have fallen back and back and back and back because most Christians have taken on the scientific point of view as as truth incarnate. I remember being a Baptist and hearing people say something like, modern science is just the mind of God. It's like, wow, that's crazy. But once you've taken that point, then they keep kind of falling back, and losing ground in the discussion. And I do think that right now there's a moment with the type of discussion that I see someone like Jordan Peterson doing, but just this whole discussion about consciousness, about the return of the phenomenological point of view, the problem of consciousness. All of these are opportunities to now help people see what the Bible has always been about and what Christianity is really about, the transformative aspect of Christianity. And so I think that right now there's an opportunity to do that. And hopefully that's what I'm trying to do as well. So, but for sure, it's not the first way to evangelize, but I do think that it's having an effect. I've seen it, I'm meeting more and more people are writing me. And so I'm seeing that there is talking about scripture and about Christianity in that way, in that kind of trying to understand it as a description of reality, trying to understand it as a description of the person in the world and this experience of the world and how it lays itself out to us, I think is a good way to do it right now. So Keenan says, and right after having a go at other people for asking long questions, let me be a hypocrite and ask another one. So Keenan asked, what Bible translation do you recommend for your reading list? I don't know. What I tend to do is I use like a King James version, but right now there's so much available resources online. I forget what the name of the website is, but there's a website you can go on, and what it does is it has all the different versions of each verse, and it also has you can have a transliterated version, and so you can read the Bible in a translation that you find appealing. I mean, I like the King James because the English is so powerful in the King James, and then if you want to dig in and get a sense of what's going on, then you can go online and you can look at the different translations and look at the transliterated text to get a sense of what is going on. That's my approach, anyways. A lot of people have told me that the Orthodox Study Bible is very good. I don't have one. I don't own a copy of it right now, and so. All right. So I will move on to subscribe star, guys. Here we go. All right. So XRD says, congrats on 50,000 subscribers. It should honestly be 10 times as much. Well, thank you so much, XRD. I appreciate it. I have to say that I'm actually kind of happy that the subscribers on my channel are moving slowly, because one of the things that I notice is I don't have a lot of hate watchers, and I think the fact that it's not like an explosion, these huge massive channels that have millions of views, especially if we're talking about touchy subjects that have to do with human relationships, a little bit of talked about politics, religion, all these difficult subjects, if your channel gets too big too fast, then you end up having a lot of hate watchers. And so I would say there's crap in my comment section for sure, like like all YouTube channels. But I would say that a lot of it is pretty good, and a lot of the discussion that happens in the comment section is pretty interesting. So I attribute that to the fact that it's like a slow, organic growth. All right, so John Bellinger asks, my evangelical wife believes pagan corruptions were introduced by Constantine into the church, and so she will not attend the Orthodox parish with me. Now, I don't mean to make you play marriage counselor, but I sense we're dealing with a fundamental difference in worldviews, the kind described in your brother's book. I was wondering if you might have any advice that could help me navigate the situation and help bridge the gap. Once again, sorry about the weighty topic. I hope to consult the priest about this soon. I would say to be careful, because I believe marriage is a sacred binding, and I think that is not only. There's some people who play tricks, and I really dislike that. You see that in Catholicism, you see that in the Orthodox too, where they have this idea that, you know, if you're not married in the church and you can get divorced and it doesn't count, and then you get married in the church. I think that's nonsense. I think that is avoiding reality and treating religion as a kind of, as these magic tricks that you can do. I think that your relationship to your wife is one of the closest things that you will ever have to what true joining of heaven and earth can be. All the difficulties that come with that, all the good things that come with that. And so I would say to be very careful. I would say that I would say to be careful not to let, especially because you're already married. If you weren't married, I would say marry someone who believes the same things as you. But if you're already married and you're changing the way that you're believing and you're kind of seeing things differently, I would say to be very careful not to destroy your relationship for religious purposes, and to trust God and to pray and to put that in God's hands, and to say, you know what, this is it's like God is leading you down this path. And if he's leading you towards orthodoxy, you should never doubt the transformative effect of prayer, and you should never doubt the fact that at some point it might happen that you and your wife will not have the same religious ideas, and that might be your cross to bear. That might be your cross to bear, and it might be for your salvation. You don't know that. So I would say to be very careful. Now, in terms of believing that Constantine introduced all these pagan corruptions into the Orthodox Church, it's like, my goodness. The solution to that is history. Like, the solution to that is history, and it's a coherent understanding of history and a coherent understanding of how you can't, on the one hand, and I've had this problem. I've had this weird debate with a Protestant pastor one time, where on the one hand he was criticizing the Council of Nicaea, or he was saying that he was criticizing Saint Athanasius for his discussion of theosis and how the purpose of creation was for us to be deified, and at the same time he was upholding the decrees of the Church Council. It's like the Constantine and the Nicene Council, our Christianity is Nicene. We believe in the full divinity of the Logos, and we believe that Christ was fully divine. And if you also believe that Christ is fully human, if you look at the further councils that came later, then you have to realize that our very formulation, when you use words like Trinity, all these things are not in the Bible. They all came about through the history of the church. And the Council of Nicaea and Constantine is part of that. And one of the things too is I think it's important to put yourself in, to help, for people need to put themselves in the position of Christians at the time. It's like we somehow think we can abstract that, and from here, imagine that you are the Christian church. You've been persecuted on and off for 300 years, sometimes more intensely, sometimes more subtly. and you're praying and you're praying and you're praying to be freed and for God to deliver you from this suffering that the church has been going through. And then the emperor of the church converts to Christianity, and all of a sudden everything flips, and all of the Roman Empire within a century has become fully Christian. Now, how can you now, standing thousands of, more than almost 2,000 years, not less than that, but whatever, like 1,500 years later, and look back at that and say, this is when Christianity started to fall. It's a sad, I think it's a sad misunderstanding of it's a sad misunderstanding of history. And a lot of the stuff, if you look at a lot of the stuff that people will criticize Constantine for doing, was there right at the beginning. It was right there. The perfect example is theosis. It's like this Protestant pastor, again, he was criticizing theosis and saying, no, it's not, that's not true Christianity and everything, and it's Constantine and Athanasius and the Council of Nicaea. And I was like, Irenaeus talks about theosis, that's before the council. This pre-conciliar Christians talked about it. And so anyways, so I'm sorry you're having to deal with that. I have more sympathy for you than you can imagine. Maybe I'll tell you about that at some other point, in some other video. All right, so Christian Chad, our moderator, our man with the name, says, hi, Jonathan. Do you think it's possible for a society to push the negative aspects of modernity back into the margin? It's hard to see since marginalization itself is under attack. How do we counter this excess of openness? Now, the thing about with your comment, it's interesting, is that modernity is not an excess of openness. Modernity is both extremes at the same time. And that's something that is very important to understand, is just because right now in North America, we are on the openness swing of the pendulum, doesn't mean that that's what modernity is. Modernity is both extremes. And so modernity is both, is both the extreme nationalism, the kind of Nazi type of desire to shut off an identity and to this idea of the absolute border between things. That's a modern thing. Ancient worlds didn't have clear borders. They had buffer zones. And so this idea of the perfect border around something, whether it's a scientific category or whether it's a race or whether it's a nation, all of this is a modern thing. Now, the pendulum swing of that is, in order to break that, then there's this excess of openness and this excess of mixture and this excess of a desire to level all differences. Now, both of those are problematic. Both of those are part of the modern problem. And it's very important to understand that, because what you see now, and you see, let's say, extreme right-wingers who think that somehow they're being traditional by falling into the opposite camp. And you're not being traditional. You're just being modern. You're just being the opposite of the type of modernity that is prevalent right now in a society. But so can we push? I don't think so. To be totally honest with you, I don't think we can do it politically, and I don't think we should do it politically. I think that, and so Christian's second question has to do with that. And so he says, have you read anything concerning NRX or neo-reaction? I'm very sympathetic to the criticism of the current system, but unsure of their solutions. What do you think they get right and wrong? And I think that I agree with you. I think that if you look at the neo-reactionaries, their criticism of the system is, a lot of it is right. A lot of it is right on. But NRX especially, like if you look at Wahlberg, there's a kind of weird snobbery, like this weird aristocratic arrogance in his approach, and this this idea, that okay, so let me phrase it this way. Now, the ultimate Christian image is that there's nothing wrong with an elite. There's nothing wrong with an intellectual elite. There's nothing wrong, I even think, with a social elite. But the Christian image of that is that the elite is supposed to love those that are lower on the hierarchy, right? And so it didn't necessarily always play out that way, but the idea is that the aristocrat loves his serfs. He's like a father to them. He takes care of them. He takes care of their needs. If they need something, they go to their leader, or the person above them, and they ask for what they need, and then that person loves them like a father loves children. And so that's the normal relationship between the, let's say, that's a Christian image of the hierarchy, right? It's like the person above loves the person below, and the person below is willing to serve the person above. But there's a deal, which is that's the proper deal. And so you can see it play itself out slowly in history as the Middle Ages went on, where it's like you had the type of chattel slavery that you had in the Roman Empire, of these slaves that were worked to death in mines or worked to death in on agricultural fields, went away during the Middle Ages. The serfs, who were in some ways were slaves, had rights. They were attached to the land. The aristocrats weren't allowed to chase them away from the land. And so there was a deal that was there between the two, where it's like, you have to take care of me, and I will protect me, take care of me. And my, let's say, answer to that is to serve you, and to provide for you materially in terms of work and all that. So that's the proper relationship. Now, what I see especially the kind of weird elitist right wingers today is a kind of disdain, like a kind of disdain for those that are below them on their hierarchy, no matter how they understand it or how they interpret it. And that, I think, is not Christian. So I don't think that the solution is, at least now, I don't think the solution is political. I think the solution is religious. I think the solution is, in terms of, let's say, thinkers that have talked about this in the past. I've mentioned him before. I don't agree with everything he said, but I think I'm closest to someone like René Guénon. His solution to the problem was to create a true elite, but a true spiritual, intellectual elite. And that doesn't mean just learning stuff. Doesn't mean just becoming smart and savvy, but it also means becoming something, coming closer to God, and also being full of love for your neighbor. All of that is part of this transformation of the person. That's what we need. What we need are saints, not. I don't think that like I said, the solution is political. It's funny because with the NRX people and these types of neo-reactionaries, I really always disliked Evola right from the beginning. I remember reading some of Evola's work and really finding that there was something off about it. Sometimes he had interesting information to provide in terms of traditional stories and stuff, but most of the time there's something off about his tone, something off about the way he saw the world. And I feel like it's escalated into some of the stuff that I see in those movements. So that's my perception of that situation. Tough questions, guys. All right. So moving on to Patreon, guys. We're about an hour. Usually I try to go for about an hour and a half, so we should be fine to get into the super chats as well. All right, so Ryan Pinkham asks, what do you think about exorcisms? My mother-in-law's priest has performed or been at several where crazy things have happened. Things flying across the room, voices, contortions. Also, what's your symbolic interpretation of them? I don't have a problem with exorcisms. I I think exorcisms are fine. Maybe if I can try to explain it a little bit for people to understand. I think that we underestimate the capacity, especially in terms of anything that has to do with I mean, you don't exercise someone because they broke their leg, right? You exercise someone because they are possessed by a principality, by a power, that they are possessed by something which is controlling them, and it's a spiritual disease, right? And so, you know, the modern psychologists, let's say, where you go and you sit on a chair and you talk about your problems, there's this idea that you can remove some of the possessions with speaking, you know, with talking about it. And you know, and that's the hint. If you believe that, you know, if you can understand that speaking and intelligence is related to the problem of powers, and that authority is related to the problem of powers, and you can understand how an exorcism can work, because an exorcism is exercising authority. So imagine there's a hierarchy of principalities, different principalities, different powers, different spirits of things that are affecting you, that are disturbing you. And if you're possessed, it means that there's one of them, there's some element, some principality which has too much pull, that has too much power over you, that has taken you over, and you've kind of you've sold your soul to the devil, right? You sold your soul to this thing, to this demon, and so now you're trapped by the demon, right? You can understand it in terms of, I mean, you can understand, anybody can understand that every time you give in to a passion, every time you give in to a sin, it's a little bit of that, right? You know, especially if you're trying to stop doing something, if you're trying to stop smoking, or you're trying to stop eating too much, or whatever it is you're trying to stop to do, and you give in, you feel that. You can feel that pull. You can feel that demon, you know, pulling at you. But there are cases where that becomes so strong, right, that a demon can truly almost take over a person, take over their personality, take over their mind, take over all of that. And so it's not weird to believe that authority could free you from that someone in authority, like a priest that already has spiritual authority, that's higher up in the hierarchy in terms of where he is related to you, and who's also invoking the highest power, who is invoking something which is above him, and those two things together can solve this problem. Now, to me, that's just not a problem that can happen. You know, it's no stranger to think that can happen than being sitting in a car and driving as a father and having your kids in the back, and then your kids are starting to get rowdy and starting to push each other and to slap each other, and then you just turn and you say stop, and they stop. That's take that times 100, take that times 1,000. That's exorcism, and it works. Like it stops. They stop. If you don't have authority over your kids, they won't. But if you do, then they'll stop. So, you know, to me, that's trying to understand an exorcism. Hopefully that helps to understand. All right, let's go. Aaron Monroe asks, what is the meaning of incorrupt saints? As one who grew up Protestant but is on a slow journey towards Orthodoxy, this seems like a world of mystery and, on the surface, the macabre. I assume there is some relation to the curse of death, yes, defeat or said curse, deification, and the resurrection, but it seems like a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. Now, I understand. I totally understand why you find that disturbing. But I think you already have the answer to your question in your question. I think you have a glimpse of what it's about. You know, it has to do with the could call it a glimpse of the resurrection, a glimpse of the what the resurrection would look like. And it's important to understand it not only in terms of the actual phenomena of an incorrupt saint, let's say, and that their body doesn't decay. It's also important to understand it in terms of the effect that has. And this has to do with relics. I've told you guys, I've talked a little bit about relics before in some of my Q&As, which is that the relic, it's not only that it is this piece of a saint, and that it is a hint of the resurrection, in the sense that this is the body is part of their continued interaction with the world and a promise of that. But it's also the fact that relics act as centers, that an incorrupt saint will draw people to the faith, will draw people to the church, will draw people to believing. And so that's also part of the mystery of the resurrection, because Christ in his resurrection had a body. The church became his body. And so the something like a relic or an incorrupt saint or a saint that performs miracles in a certain place, that has to do with this promise of the resurrection, because around that saint, it's like a little body, not just the actual physical remains, but the fact that there's that there's healing, that there's people coming to visit the relics. All of this is a small, like a fractal. It's a smaller version of the pattern that you're seeing, and it's a promise, and it's also a manner in which you can understand what ultimately the resurrection can be, and what a resurrected saint, how they act as the new principalities in the world, how in Christ we are called to rule with him, that the saints are going to rule with Christ and will be the principles of the total world, let's say. And so to watch this happen in terms of a relic or the incorrupt body of a saint is to get a glimpse of what that actually looks like, and to see this community turning around this. All right. So Ryan Pinkham also asks, how do you interpret the passages that Christ says he came to bring division, set a man against his brother, his father, daughter, and his mother, etc.? Seems like a tricky one. No, I don't. There's nothing tricky about that. The thing about the Logos is that the Logos both unites and separates. That's what the Logos does right at the beginning of the Bible. That for anything to exist, it has to be separated from potentiality, and it also has to then become one. So the Logos is always separating and joining. If you call out something, if you say, "Let there be this," right? You're pulling it out, you're cutting it, you're separating, and you're making it one. So those two things are always happening at the same time. The Logos is always doing those at the same time. And so there are some times in the scripture where Christ, as he's talking, or his actions, tend to emphasize one side or the other. And so Christ talks about a good verse is when he talks about how he said he came for the rising and falling of many. That is, Christ is both the capstone and the tripping stone, the stumbling stone. That those are the two things that Christ does. Like he can bring you up to the highest, but he will also make you stumble, because he has both of those in him. So it's not weird. It's difficult because we really want Jesus to just be the nice guy that loves everybody, but that Christ is the divine Logos, the incarnate Logos, and so his love is both, is a consuming fire, but is also a dividing fire. It's both at the same time. So it can do both. Hopefully, it gives you a little bit of sense of that. All right. I hope everything is fine in the chat, guys, because I am, because my screen on this laptop is so small, I'm struggling to be able to see the questions and the chat at the same time. So hopefully everything's okay. But I trust Jacob and Christian Chad. All right. So here we go. So Drew McMahon asked, "Hi Jonathan, did you get a chance to watch Matt Dillahunty Jay Dyer debate? If so, what were your thoughts? How important should apologetics, and should one be striving to coherently justify their belief in God, or is that belief presuppose and ultimately rational justification a circular endeavor?" Jay sent me the link to the debate, and I started to watch it. I think I watched maybe like the first 45 minutes, but since like I said, since I moved and now I don't even have the internet at home, so I'm not watching any YouTube videos, so I have not finished the debate. I think that there are different people have different roles, and the role that I have, or the role that I'm playing, is not the same that role that Jay is playing. And I think that, I think we can't reduce everything to one thing. And so, I appreciate that Jay's able to engage with atheists. I have seen every event I go to now. I'll be totally honest with you guys. Every event I go to now, I meet people who tell me that they're becoming Orthodox, that they're coming to Christianity, that they're moving in that direction. And usually they'll tell me that it's a mix of my videos and Jay Dyer's videos. And so it's like I can see that it's working. Like I can see that he's having an effect on people. He's shaking them up. He's surprising them. And so I think that's great. But like I said, I don't have the same approach that he does, and I would never do that. Like I would never have a debate on the existence of God, because that's not, I don't argue with people. You probably noticed this. I don't argue with people. I'd rather try to show the, show the pattern, show the beauty, surprise people with something they haven't thought about, in terms of, not to convince them, but to kind of get that little spark, to hit that spark, when someone opens up their eyes. But that's not for everybody. Some people really are convinced by arguments. And so I think I wish him all the best in what he's doing. All right. So Mark Peters asks, "Hello, Jonathan. I've heard you mention Husserl. How much has he shaped your understanding of biblical symbolism? Without being a Husserl scholar, it seems that his being in the world is related to the mind's apprehension of meaning through experience, and the way by which that same meaning is transfigured by and through the written word. So, when you and Mathieu say that the symbolic language in Genesis is not merely derivative, but is the presentation of the thing itself to us, there still seems to be an intermediate step in how we understand mountain and garden. The step appears to be a stripping away of what are otherwise symbolic attributions. And when a street sign dictates our behavior, or even that particular letters stand for a specific sound, so there is a type of unique biblical symbolic language." No, I don't think so. There is not a unique type of biblical symbolic language. And we have to be careful that what you mean by stripping away of what are otherwise symbolic attributions. I think that maybe you haven't totally kind of gotten to what we're talking about when we're talking about symbolism. You could say something as radical as that symbolism is the very reason why you perceive unity in anything. The fact that you see anything as one, that you can say that's a computer, that's a person, that's this. That is the symbolic process, the coming together of elements, the joining together of multiples into one. That's the symbol. And so the idea is a lot of the rationalizations, come later. And I do think there is an aesthetic, maybe I get what you're saying. There is an aesthetic practice which you can do, which is to try to get to the basic elements, you could say. So, let's say you want to try to understand what clothing is. You try to find the most basic elements, that which really constitutes clothing, not in terms of just their not just in terms of their physical existence, but in terms of the why would that exist? Like, why would clothing exist? Why would we consider that a category? And so it's like human intention, human existence is in there with the categorization, the purpose of the thing. And so that's why St. Maximus, in St. Maximus the Confessor, that's why you see that he takes the idea of the ideas, he takes the notion of the ideas in Plato, but he also joins them with the notion of purpose. And so the logos in St. Maximus is the essence of something, but it's also its purpose. It's also its origin, right? And it's also its purpose, and also in the sense of like it's telos. So it's like all of that is bound up in St. Maximus's notion of logos. And so that's, I think, is such a useful thing in order to understand how this experience of the world we have, is full, is glowing. If you can really be attentive, it's full of meaning, because you can't, like I said, you can't even perceive the world without meaning. Now, in terms of Husserl, to be honest, I've read more Heidegger than Husserl. For some reason, I find Heidegger easier to understand. Some people will say, yeah, whatever, Heidegger is really hard to understand. I don't know why. I don't know why that when I read Heidegger, I just understand what he's talking about more. I find that when I read Husserl, that was a long time ago now, it just wasn't clicking for me. I just wasn't, I could see what he was trying to get to, but I felt like, I don't know. I do prefer Heidegger. All right, guys. Okay, so we are done with the question. So I'm going to jump into the super chats. Let's get them up here. Should have had them up there already. Sorry, guys. In the meantime, I can tell you guys that I haven't put it up yet in terms of my, on my website, there's a section where you can find all my coming events. And so I am going to be in Chicago at the end of October. And so that is if you guys are near Chicago, it would be great for you to come. I'm going to speak at in a Catholic church where there is a Sacred Arts Guild. And so I will be there. All right. Okay, so here we go. I've got the super chats in front of me. Let's see. All right, I think this is doable. There aren't that many. All right, let's do this. Like I said, I will not read. If there are any obscenities and stupid stuff, I'm not going to read it. So don't waste your money if you're just going to say stupid stuff. All right, so Michelle Alta asks, for $2.99, she asks, why was hell created and how? Yeah. Well, I think we've been over this a few times, but it depends what you mean by hell. If by hell you mean death, or if by hell you mean the river of fire, if there's a relationship kind of between the two, but they're not the same. The idea is that hell wasn't created in the basic sense. It's mostly that hell is, let's say, death is a byproduct of existence. What do I mean? For things to exist, for something besides the infinite one of God to exist, there has to be a relationship between multiplicity and unity. And that's even for God in Christian terms. We believe in the Holy Trinity. We believe that unity and multiplicity, that's the pattern of everything. And so death, hell, is a byproduct of that, because if you move towards, if you split them apart, then you get death, right? If you don't have them together, you don't have unity and multiplicity together, you get death, right? And so if you move towards the oneness of something only, then you see it also as, let's say, self-containing, then that's pride, and then you fall, and then what it gives you is death in the sense of a breaking apart. And so it's not that hell is created, it's that it's like it's the it's the risk of reality, right? It's the risk of reality existing, is the possibility of breakdown, where we fall into idiosyncrasies and we lose the cohesion of what we are, and that's what death is in the Bible. Now, in terms of the river of fire, the lake of fire, the most common, at least Orthodox understanding of it is to understand that it is the presence of God itself. It's the love of God, which is what's burning people in hell. And I've explained it a few times. I can explain it one last time, maybe. If you close yourself off, if you want to live in this idiosyncratic thing, right? If you have some passion, let's say you give in to some anger, and you live in your anger, like, anger gives you this energy, like it gives you a sense that you're alive. Like when you're angry, you feel alive, and you throw yourself into that, and that it becomes you, and it because it makes you feel powerful, and it gives you that sense, right? That thrill, and so you attach yourself to it. And then when the infinite love of God, you come into contact with it, that love wants to connect you to everything else, wants to say, no, that little thing that you've attached yourself to, that's not you. That's not totality. You're wrong about that. You're deluding yourself if you think that this is what gives you life, right? But if you refuse to let go, then it's going to burn you. It's going to burn you, because it's like you're faced with reality and you're refusing reality. You want to hold on to your illusion, but you still have reality in your face that's like permeating you, but you refuse to let go. And that's the general Orthodox understanding of hell. Hope that makes sense. All right, so Stephen Anderson asked, can you expand on the vinegar that was offered to Christ on the cross? To me, it seems like an inversion of wine, but just wondering what you made of it. That's also a really mysterious aspect that I've been thinking about for years. And I think that it has to do with death. For sure it has to do with drinking the vinegar has to do with dying, because it's not that it's an inversion of wine. It's that wine is death. It's like a controlled death, you could say, in the sense that it's contained in a process, and then if it goes too far, then it becomes vinegar. And so I think that that's what it has to do with. It has to do with bitterness as well. It has to do with drinking the ocean. You could say something like that. This idea of the lower waters in Scripture, the idea of bitter waters, of the salt waters. So I think that Christ drinking vinegar has to do with that image as well. It's like he's taking this chaotic potential, this chaotic death into himself. That's the best I can do, but I think there's more to it than that. But I haven't pierced that mystery completely. So the mad truth asks, oh, wait, I'm in the wrong Q&A, guys. What is going on? Oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm not even looking at you probably have told me already 10 times in the comments that I'm reading the old questions. I'm reading the July Q&A questions. See, that's how, my goodness, don't trust me with this stuff, technology. My goodness. All right. Okay, I am going back. It'll just make this conversation longer. I'll let it go a little longer. All right, so August Q&A. Sorry. Here we go. The Mad Truth. I noticed because I saw the Mad Truth that asked me a question in July Q&A, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is something wrong with here. So the Mad Truth asks, I hope that my answer to the question was the same as the one I said before. I think I'm going to go back and listen to my old answer and see if I answered the same thing or if I changed it. If I changed it, So the Mad Truth says, do you believe that Christianity, more than other religions, most completely reveals the structure and meaning of the universe and God? The answer is yes. And I think that a lot of people will be cynical about that because I am Christian. I was born Christian, and I can understand the cynicism that you would have regarding that. But I'm going to make a video on this pretty soon, and I'm gonna explain it more. And I think that right now is a good time to understand that. I think that one of the aspects, there are many aspects which makes Christianity the highest, the most powerful image of reality. One has to do with the fact that it contains its own destruction within itself, its own destruction, which leads to a resurrection. So it's almost as if Christianity has anticipated the whole thing. It's like within its story, it has a betrayal, right? So Judas betrays Christ, and then Christ dies, and then he resurrects. And then you have this image that out of Christianity will come Antichrist, and that Antichrist will devour, will destroy, or not completely succeed, but come almost to the point of destroying Christianity, and then out of that will be another flip, and it's going to return. And so I think that that's really a really powerful image. And also because Christ contains, all the extremes in one person. He has, I've been telling you guys about this for a few months now. He's both the king and the criminal, and he has all these extremes kind of all joined into one story. And he goes to the highest, into the Holy of Holies. He descends into the bottom of the earth. It's like he fills up the whole world. And so I don't think there's another story like that. Maybe someone can find one for me. I can look at it, but I don't think there's another story like that. All right, so the Mad Truth again asks, is it necessary Jesus be a historic person? Is not Christ's spirit in hearts and minds enough? Is he not that for those who didn't meet the historic person? And I think that it is necessary for Jesus to be a historic person because Christ joins it all together. And so it can't just be an idea. It has to have had a realization in the world for the whole thing to come together. Because that's what Christ is. Christ is the joining of all the realities together, you could say. And so because of that, it also has to have happened. If the story of Christ, let's say the story we have in the Gospels, does not refer to events that happen in the world, does not refer to a person that was born and lived and died and resurrected in the world, then it's not Christ. It's not the fullness. It doesn't have it all, right? It's just, you could say it's just heavenly. It's just disincarnate. It's just a pattern, right? But it doesn't have the fullness in the connection to the world. It's not that point that joins heaven and earth together, that fills the earth with heaven, and that brings the earth up into heaven as well, right? This crazy image that St. Paul uses, right? It's like everything is gathered gathered together and brought into God, right? That's the theosis that Christ accomplishes. And so once you start to understand that, it's not as bothersome to. It's almost as if people believe that there's something demeaning about the idea that Christ is an actual person. There's something trite about that. There's nothing trite about it, because that's the whole point. That's the whole point of all things joining together. Right. So I hope that answers. So the Mad Truth asked me what English translation I would recommend. I think I answered that. All right, let's see. So James David asks, how do I share my experiences with others without disgracing the personal feminine experience by explicating it? Perhaps things that should remain implicit are things that are inherent good, their own ends. I think that you really have a good question. You really have a good question. There's something tricky about that, and which is, Christ talks about going into the secret place. He talks about the praying in the secret place. And that's true prayer. Go into your room, shut the door, and pray in secret. Now the problem is that so I understand what you're asking, in the sense that if you don't talk about, let's say, those experiences, then you think they're not going to have an effect in the world. It's the weird thing about humility. It's the weird thing about, and I agree that it's kind of hard to understand, but that's why you see that most saint stories are usually told by someone else. That the only saint with an autobiography is Augustine, for what that's worth. I don't want to be trite about this. I like Augustine. I'm not against Augustine, but it is interesting that Augustine is the probably one of the only saints that has a published autobiography. Anyways, usually sometimes what they'll do is that they'll find some writings of the saint after they're dead. They'll find things that they've written down, their journals or whatever, or other people will have seen them, heard them, talked to them, and will have gotten glimpses of their holiness. And so there is this idea that you have to be careful not to boast of your spiritual experiences, but it's tricky. I agree with you. It's tricky. I don't have a set answer for you. So Jonathan Ott asks, magic seems in part to be an inversion of the traditional means of approaching God, such as when Saul seeks a witch to make Samuel talk from beyond the grave. What is magic? Your thoughts? I think magic is too broad a category. It's in terms of understanding this. I think that magic, you could say that one of the problems we've had is the whole of modernity has really ruined our understanding of magic or magicians or all that stuff. It's like, I think that magic traditionally, at least, was just the desire to use knowledge to affect the world, like to understand how language, how ritual, how certain interactions can affect reality. If you look at it in the Middle Ages, the magicians were neither good nor bad in the Middle Ages. They were just there was good magic and there was bad magic, and it was like, if you practice good magic, it was then a big deal. You maybe it's like maybe you should pray, but it's like you could, and if you practice bad magic, then you could be brought to court, but it was because of the effect that you were having. And so I think it's like I said, it's tricky. Now, there is something about magic that is negative, especially in the Old Testament. The very idea of affecting the world in the Old Testament is extremely negative. The idea that there's something fishy about even building a city. There's something fishy about even building this idea of the altar of uncut stone is the ultimate altar. This idea of leaving things pristine, not modifying nature. You see that in the whole tradition of Enoch. You have this idea that it's the fallen angels that taught human beings skills by which to modify nature, and skills related to magic and science, what we call science today. And so in that sense, you could understand it as an inversion, because it's a desire to take control and to control our circumstances, right? To control what's going to happen to us, to trust in the material world, trust in our power, trust in all that. So there's pride in that, all of that. But it's not just magic; it's also technology as well. So we have to be careful not to think that magic, because it's old and because it doesn't fit with the way we understand the world, is somehow evil. But that technology is fine. It's like there's something tricky about affecting of our desire to want to control, to affect, to stabilize the world, right, and have absolute control over it. Now, in terms of necromancy, which is what you're referring to, that's a whole other question. This idea of making residues speak, capturing the residues of something and using it to have power. I think that's a whole other thing, and it's also probably the most dangerous type of magic, you could say, in the sense that there is power, and there's power in death. I've talked to you guys about this. There's power hidden in the residues of things. How can I explain this in a way that you guys will understand and won't think I'm absolutely crazy? All right, a good way to understand it is this. Has to do also with divinization, right? Most divinization is creating a kind of chaotic thing, right? Mixing a bowl, or throwing some stones, or throwing lots, right? So casting lots, and then looking into the lots, having a deck of cards, tarot cards, and them coming out by chance, and then now gathering that into a pattern, okay? And in a certain way, you could almost say that project into the pattern. So a good way to see how necromancy is very powerful today is archaeology. Archaeology is a form of necromancy. And so you dig into the ground and you find these things that are disconnected from memory, that are forgotten, that have no participative life anymore. And then you use these things to interpret the world with. And so a great example, one of the greatest examples was like the Egyptology madness that came about, in the time of the Enlightenment, where people like Newton and all these people were obsessed with Egypt because they couldn't read the language, and so it was this dead thing, completely dead. There was no connection. Then the connection was severed between heaven and earth. There was just these residues of a civilization. And then they used that, they dug into the ground, they found these statues, these hieroglyphs, all these things. And then they used that to try to destroy Christianity. They used it to try to, they projected into it all their passions, all their ideas, all they wanted it to be. And then they used it to try to have an effect on the world. And so that's a form of necromancy, and it's very dangerous, because what you're capturing are these dead residues. And so the pattern is something that you like I said, you end up projecting into it, and it can be very powerful. That's why a lot of they find some random bit of text in the desert in Egypt that's like 3 lines, and then a scholar will declare that they have debunked all of the Christian history because they found this random piece of text in the desert, and it's still happening today. It's continually happening. Every Easter, around the time of Easter, we have some discovery that some archaeologist made that is going to disprove to us Christianity. It's just necromancy. So don't be convinced by that stuff. All right. So Gabriel R. asks, why do you struggle with taking a stand for or against Darwinism? It's very odd, as it's not trivial matter for the Orthodox. Well, Gabriel, when you say it's not a trivial matter for the Orthodox, I'm not sure who you're talking about. I'm sure it's not a trivial matter for some Orthodox, and I'm sure it's a trivial matter for some Orthodox. For this Orthodox, I find it to be a trivial matter. I don't feel like it is a useful. I don't feel like it's a useful place to fight. I just don't see. I think the danger of believing in scientism as being the first manner in which reality is understood is far more dangerous than Darwin specifically. And my tendency to, let's say, ignore Darwin has to do with my tendency to understand our experience in the world as being more primordial than a technical description of how animals reproduce or how their genes, So, and I think that I don't even understand, like, take a stand against Darwin. I don't understand. It's like a lot of the stuff that Darwin described is perfectly fine in the sense of how selection happens and how different mates select different mates and how it encourages different aspects of different animals. Like, for my goodness sake, like, people have been doing it to dogs for 10,000 years. That's why we have all these different species of dogs, because the process that he describes was pretty good in terms of understanding how this happens. Now, whether or not Darwin thinks that he can create a narrative out of that, I mean, I don't attach myself to that narrative at all. Like, that story I find is not useful in terms of our existence. I find that the story in the Bible, the way that they describe this coming into consciousness, and then this relationship between language, word, and how the world comes about through language and speaking the world into being, how a certain form of consciousness, the opening of the eyes and the seeing of the two opposites of good and evil, will lead to fragmentation and to a fall. Like, to me, that is far more useful to living in the world than anything Darwin could ever have said. To me, Darwin is like a little footnote in reality. And so I don't feel like I need to take a stand against Darwinism any more than, to me, it's just not important. So I'm sorry. I mean, whatever. Like, anyways, that's all I can say, guys. Like, I just don't find it. I just don't find it that important. I don't find that's where my battle needs to be. And I find creationists silly. Like, the kind of the type of creationist that has fully taken the scientism pill and is trying to force feed that pill into the book of Genesis. I find that far more disgusting and far more unbearable than anything that Darwin said, because at least Darwin wasn't talking about the Bible. At least Darwin wasn't trying to get us to think that those beautiful, amazing stories that we have in Genesis were limited to some technical, some technical scientific description of the world. Sorry, guys. Now you're gonna get me into rant mode here, guys. All right, so Drew McMahon asked, to clarify my question about apologetics, I was not necessarily asking if you personally would debate the way Jay does, but rather if one can have a fully rational justification for God, or if it's presupposed. All right, I understand, Drew. No, I don't think that we can have a fully rational justification for God. I do believe that reason, properly engaged, has within itself the capacity to also show its limits, and so I believe that through reason we can see the limits of reason, and we can see how it points to something which transcends it, or something which is beyond it. Like, I think that your thoughts can point you towards the noose, but they can never reach there. It's like there's a cutoff, and then at some point there's something beyond it. And so I think that I don't think that it's useless to engage in reasonable discussion about God. I think that's silly to say that, but I don't think that in reason is where we encounter the fullness of God. And I would be surprised if, for example, Jay thinks that. I don't think, probably Jay doesn't think that, because if you read St. Gregory of Palamas, you read St. Maximus the Confessor, they talk about God, this encounter with God as an experience, right? As a participative act, as a participative reality, not as a reasonable or rational argument. But like I said, I don't think it's useless. But so hopefully that answers the question, guys. All right. All right, guys. So I hope that the chat was not too crazy. I'll have to let me just reload the chat, see if new things came up. Reload the super chat. So hopefully it wasn't too crazy. I'll try to get a sense from Drew, from Christian, and from Jacob how it went later. I'll probably go through some of your comments when I log off. And then next month I will hopefully have a bigger screen, and I'll be able to follow the chats also while they're going on, a little bit while I'm talking. Something I find hard to do. I really am impressed by the YouTubers who are somehow able to coherently speak and at the same time like follow the super chat. All right, let me see. It's not loading for some reason. Come on, guys. Come on. All right, for some reason the super chats won't load up again. Sorry, guys. All right. So let me see. Come on. So if it doesn't load, what I'll do is I'll either try to answer in the chat through text, or next month I'll try to get to those. For some reason, it is not loading. I don't know why. YouTube doesn't want to give me the chats. All right, let me just scroll up this way now. All right, guys. I think I got most of them. Sorry. No. All right. So I'm seeing some stuff. All right. Oh, I think I missed some questions. because, oh, I know which question I missed, by the way. Let me get back to that. Give me 2 seconds. All right, so there was someone who sent me a question. Let's see, here we go. Man. This is where you are seriously seeing my problems with technology. All right, okay, here we go. Ah, man, sorry guys. I'm not ready for this. All right, so Laura Giles asked a question because she couldn't for some reason get okay, here we go. I can't find her question. That's horrible. All right, Laura, if you're watching this, I am sorry. I will get to your question next month. And let's see, let me see in the chat. All right, so Christian says you might have missed a Patreon question from Robert Smith. Robert Smith, all right. Okay, I see. Here we go. Robert Smith asks, what are the symbolic differences, if any, between waters from above, rain, waters at earth level, and waters that come from below, springs, aquifers, well waters? All right. So one of the important things to understand, I think I've kind of answered that before a little bit. I think that the most important thing to understand about water is that water always flows down. And so no matter where it comes from, like it tends to always come down. And so that's why waters are seen as kind of the influence of heaven, you could say. And that's why you have the separation of waters above and below in scripture. So you have this upper potentiality, you could call it, and this lower potentiality. So the upper potentiality is the spiritual influence that comes down from heaven, and then the lower waters, the salt waters, are this kind of chaotic potentiality that's at the bottom of the world, right? And so what's important is understanding how those ultimately come from the same place. That's the non-duality of Christianity, which a lot of people struggle to understand. But so when you talk about rain, the water that comes from above is always fresh water. It falls. So all water that comes from above is always fresh. Whether it's a river that comes down, whether it's water, the rain that comes down, it's running, it's living water. Christ talks about living water. So it's this river that comes down. And then the water that's below, so the water above is a masculine image, right? Christ talks about that in his encounter with the Samaritan woman, where he talks about living water, that he'll give her living water, and she offers him well water from below, this stable water, right? And so that's the kind of the way to understand it. Like the water that is coming down is masculine, and the water that is below is feminine. And in terms of the water below, you have two types of waters. You have bitter waters, and you have fresh water, or water that you can drink. And so the bitter waters are, let's say, the two aspects of the lower waters. We talked about this before. It's like one is chaos, one is potential, and they come from the same place. But one is potentiality, is how it's related to heaven and how it can be joined with heaven, and let's say chaos is how it's not joined with heaven, something like that. And so that's how you can understand the relationship between the waters above and the waters below. All right, hopefully that does it for that. All right, guys. Sorry this is so chaotic. All right, let me, and I'm really annoyed that I can't find this question. She wrote me. Okay, I think I got it. Sorry, guys. This isn't doing well. It's not doing well. All right. All right, so that's not going to happen. So let's see let's see once again if there are questions in the chat that I missed. All right, thanks for a lot of you guys are sending. Some of you guys are sending super chats, not actually asking a question. So that's very kind of you. I appreciate it. All right, guys. So I think we've come to the end of this. Sorry that it got a little bit crazy at the end, a little bit chaotic. Once again, guys, I appreciate you coming in on this. We had more people than usual too. I think we reached up to like 170. So that's pretty cool. And I'm gonna, like I said, I'm leaving in a week to the US. I'm gonna be in South Carolina almost like for a month, but probably I will actually, so I'm saying that next time I'll be fine. I'll probably be doing my next Q&A from the US. And so I'll still have this little laptop, and it might be, I might have the same problem. So sorry guys, we do what we can here. So thanks again guys once again, and I will see you in a month.